In the freezing heart of Nazi-occupied Europe, there are stories the history books almost forgot. Stories that would have stunned even the hardened veterans of World War II, a war that shaped the fate of the modern world. Picture this: December 1943. The tiny town of Dinant, Belgium, shivers beneath a silent, gray sky. Snow piles up along medieval streets lined with broken windows and battered hopes. It's the kind of bitter winter that seems to freeze time itself. But nothing, not even the chill of December, can match the fear that stalks these cobblestone alleys. Inside the ancient walls of the Sisters of Mercy Convent, a different kind of cold settles in, a cold that comes not from outside, but from the threat that has infiltrated every corner of Europe: the Nazi war machine. American history classes talk about the battlefields and the bombers, but hidden away in places like this, battles were being fought in kitchens, cellars, and whispered conversations. And standing at the center of one such quiet battlefield is a woman few would ever suspect, a nun named Sister Marie Clare. Born and raised in Montreal, Canada, she had already seen her share of hardship before ever donning her habits, but nothing could have prepared her for the war closing in on her chosen home. On a bleak December morning, the nightmare becomes real. Three Nazi officers, hard-faced and cold-eyed, stride into the convent's kitchen like they own the world. The tallest, a Gestapo captain whose stare could make winter seem warm, pauses at the battered copper cauldron over the fireplace. He barks orders first in sharp German, then switches to fractured French. The message is clear, and the threat is even clearer. The sisters will prepare a lavish Christmas lunch for 45 German officers. The Nazis will arrive at noon, hungry for power, and the soup must be ready exactly by 2 o'clock. Just outside the kitchen window, 23 orphan children kick a battered ball through the snowy courtyard, watched by the weary eyes of elderly refugees in the shadows. To the untrained eye, it almost looks peaceful, but peace here has become an illusion, a cruel joke of the German occupation. Just that morning, the town's doors were plastered with sinister new posters written in blocky, startling print. For every German soldier killed by resistance fighters, 10 Belgian civilians are to be executed. No trial, no mercy. And the resistance has struck 12 times in the past 8 days. That's 127 innocent men, women, and even children condemned to die unless something, somehow, changes. Inside the convent, terror and hope live side by side. Every morning, Marie Clare leads prayers for miracles amid echoes of gunfire and shouted orders. The refugees, exiled from villages leveled by Nazi tanks, huddle in the chapel, lips moving in desperate silence. They count their days by whether the church bells toll for worship or for execution. U.S. soldiers facing the Battle of the Bulge would later talk about fear, but few ever endured a Christmas like this, waiting for a massacre, knowing that any spark from the resistance could light the entire town on fire. But even as the darkness presses in, Sister Marie Clare refuses to show fear. Her hands are steady, her eyes unblinking as she cleans the cauldron for the enemy's feast. She counts her rations, plans her chores, hugs each orphan with a tenderness forged in crisis. To the Nazis, she's just another nun, silent, obedient, harmless. They have no idea who she truly is or the fire burning behind her quiet exterior. On the eve of war's most sacred holiday, the convent prepares to feed its occupiers, while knowing that every meal could be a matter of life or death. And as night falls on occupied Belgium, one chilling question remains: how far would you go to save the people you love if every way out comes at a terrible price? But Sister Marie Clare already understands. The only thing colder than this wartime winter is the silence that follows a choice you can never take back. And in the shadows of the convent, the real battle is about to begin. For Americans, images of World War II often conjure up Allied troops storming Normandy's beaches, dogfights in the European skis, or generals planning D-Day in smoky war rooms. But in occupied Belgium, the war took on a different shape. It lived in the constant tap-tap of German boots across stone floors and in the hungry eyes of families hiding in cellars from their would-be executioners. And inside the convent, a supposed sanctuary, fear is no longer just a shadow, it is a constant companion. Each morning begins with a ritual of barely controlled panic. The nuns wake before light to the sound of distant artillery and the echo of boots on icy cobblestones. They never know which day might be their last. U.S. Army intelligence would later report that Nazi reprisals in Belgium were some of the most brutal in Europe, a pattern of killing civilians meant to crush the spirit of rebellion. Even as American GIS push onward across France, there are thousands like Sister Marie Clare waging silent battles behind enemy lines, in kitchens and bedrooms, in the space between faith and desperation. Inside the convent's stone walls, every room overflows with people just hopping to survive. 23 orphan children occupy makeshift beds in the classrooms, while the ancient chapel now shelters 47 elderly refugees, people whose homes were bombed out, whose villages were erased by German tanks. Each visitor has a name, a story, and a face carved by war. To these souls, the nuns are their last line of defense. Every meal, every prayer, every moment is one taken from the jaws of danger. But survival is far from guaranteed. The Gestapo's cruel logic, now declared in block letters nailed to every door, dictates the rhythm of terror in this town. For every Nazi soldier attacked by partisans or Allied commandos, 10 random Belgians will die. When the underground resistance targeted a patrol the previous week, something U.S. wartime propaganda would have heralded as a sign of hope, Marie Clare watched as her town crossed a point of no return. The lists of the condemned, posted with ruthless precision, churn in her mind as she works in the convent kitchen. 127 names. Some are people she knows, others just children who once played in the streets beneath the gaze of the American silver bombers flying overhead. Even as American headlines pulse with big, bold victories, places like the convent sink deeper into isolation and terror. There is no cavalry coming, no tank brigade to break through the snow. There are only the daily calculations, how much food remains, how to keep the children quiet when soldiers march past, how to shield the old and frail from panic and frostbite. U.S. commandos might infiltrate enemy lines with weapons and sabotage, but for Sister Marie Clare, resistance requires invisible armor, faith, hope, ingenuity, and a heart still willing to risk everything for another's chance at life. Routine has become its own kind of rebellion. In the kitchen, Sister Marie Clare keeps every ritual as precise as a soldier loading his rifle. She scrubs the copper cauldron, counts out the bread, checks the dwindling supply of salt and onions. Every act says one thing to those watching: life continues. The Germans may occupy the streets, but they can't control what happens behind these ancient walls, at least not completely. The children play, their laughter muffled by the fear in their caretakers' hearts. The elderly whisper prayers as bells mark the passing hours. The nuns carry their burdens with steady grace, projecting a calm they don't dare break. But under the mask of ritual, fear constantly lurks. With every knock at the door or unexpected footstep in the hallway, hearts race with the same adrenaline coursing through U.S. paratroopers on a midnight drop. Each sudden sound could mean a Gestapo raid or another name added to the execution list. Sister Marie Clare feels the crushing weight of their survival pressing in on her like the Belgian winter fog. She's haunted not just by the threat outside, but by the knowledge that every act of resistance, every act of mercy, could bring unimaginable retaliation. And as Christmas approaches, a day that in American homes brings peace, gifts, and hope, here in the convent it's a deadline. Not for celebration, but for potential slaughter. Every candle lit, every carol sung, every bowl of soup handed to a child is a prayer that the coming week won't end in tragedy. Yet under all this, one question grows stronger day by day. When the enemy moves to end your community, do you stand by in hope or dare to fight back, risking everyone for a chance at justice? Sister Marie Clare can no longer ignore the answer inside her, because living in fear and responsibility means knowing that not acting is its own kind of violence. And inside these battered walls, resistance is no longer just a whisper, it's about to become a plan. In wartime, there's always a front line, even if it's just a wooden kitchen table in the dead of night. Far from the thunder of American guns and the armored columns pushing through France, another battle is brewing in the shadows of German-occupied Belgium. It's a battle for hearts, minds, and survival, a fight that often slips beneath the radar of U.S. war correspondents and military analysts, yet is no less heroic for its secrecy. It is just past midnight when the convent's ancient bell tolls once, barely audible above the howl of the winter wind. Down in the pitch-black cellar, past crates of stored root vegetables and the lingering scent of wood smoke, a hidden door creaks open. 3 figures slide in, glancing over their shoulders, boots crunching softly on the stone floor. They are not elite commandos or foreign spies. They're ordinary Belgians transformed into resistance fighters by desperation and raw courage. One is Pierre, a local baker with forearms built by kneading dough, but hardened now by sabotage and stealth. Next is Jean-Luc, a schoolteacher whose dreams once centered on books and quiet classrooms, appended by a curriculum of explosive devices and coded messages. The last is Marie, a farmer's daughter who went from churning butter to running covert supply lines and smuggling British flyers out of occupied territory. This night they aren't here to pray, they are here to plot war. At the head of the table sits Sister Marie Clare, her face carved by anxiety and resolve. Her presence in this clandestine meeting alone would have shocked the Allies. Here is a nun, sworn to compassion, entertaining a plan that could change the course of a Nazi-occupied town's destiny. As the candle flickers, each insurgent spills their idea, voices dropping to careful whispers. Pierre, voice roughened by paranoia, pounds the table. We can strike the German headquarters tonight, set fire to their records, draw every Nazi officer away from the square. Maybe that buys the hostages more time. His plan is pure sabotage, something any GI would recognize from their own training manuals on hit-and-run guerrilla warfare. Jean-Luc, ever the strategist, shakes his head. A bomb under the old bridge cuts off their escape. With the Allies closing in, that could slow reinforcements and supply trucks. We've seen how the Americans do it, blow the bridge and break their lines. His blueprint echoes sabotage missions pulled off by American OSS operatives deep behind enemy lines. But Marie is more direct, a proposal straight from the partisan playbook. The execution squad will march through the market square at dawn. What if we ambush them first? With a little luck, a few rifles, she trails off, knowing the Nazi response will be ruthless. As Sister Marie Clare listens to these desperate ideas, her hands lie perfectly still, folded beneath the table. She doesn't flinch at the thought of violence, only at the near certainty of German vengeance. Every American war movie frames such moments as heroic, but reality in this frigid stone-walled room is much messier. In Nazi-occupied territory, bravery and doom often go hand in hand. The math is cruel. For every German killed, dozens of Belgian innocents would be murdered in reprisal. The precedent across Europe is chilling. In France, the Orator massacre. In eastern Poland, entire villages erased as warnings. Here, the formula is clear. Striking back brings death to those you're trying to protect. For a long moment, the group falls silent, the only sound the distant snarl of a German patrol car. Then, quietly, Sister Marie Clare stands and moves into the candlelight. Her voice, always soft, now holds a new gravity, a calculated scientist's certainty beneath a holy woman's kindness. "What if there's another way?" she whispers, those words loaded with the same dangerous hope that fueled American codebreakers at Bletchley Park or the daring of U.S. agents in the French resistance. What if those Nazi officers never make it to Christmas morning, but no bullet gives us away? Her question carries the weight of history. Around the world, covert operations are reshaping the battlefield. But Marie Clare's weapon isn't dynamite or sabotage, it's chemistry. a secret buried under 9 years of vows and habits. The other resistance fighters stare, uncomprehending, until she reveals the truth she's kept from everyone in Belgium. Before the war, before God and faith drew her to the convent, she was Marie Claire Bowman, trained chemist at McGill University in Canada. She researched agricultural pesticides, studied the properties of compounds U.S. Army intelligence would later recognize as perfect for clandestine poisoning. She knows how to dose arsenic where it is slow, silent, and if placed carefully, undetectable. Instantly Pierre scoffs. The Germans test every dish. SS inspectors taste before the officers eat. It's foolproof. Here is the American Special Operations dilemma, outsmarting an enemy that's always on alert. But Sister Marie Clare has paid attention. The Gestapo inspector checks only the first spoonful, then moves on. If a contaminant was added after the inspection, in the chaos of serving dozens, it could work. The poison must be slow, disguised, a ghost in the soup that could pass for natural food poisoning. A few grams could bring Germans to their knees, just as Nazi poison attacks had done to unsuspecting agents across Europe. The plan hangs in the musty air, somewhere between audacity and madness. Could they be the ones to strike the blow? Would the risk be justified if it meant saving every name on the execution list? If every whisper from Allied intelligence warned against such moves, knowing German brutality would follow, does that make inaction better? Marie Claire answers with a calm, almost chilling clarity. True resistance isn't always about running toward the bullet. Sometimes, it's about outsmarting evil, rewriting the odds with the knowledge the enemy never suspects you possess. As the candle's flame dances in the darkness, a new front line is drawn, not on any U.S. Army maps, but right here, where an unassuming nun begins to calculate death for the first time, hopping somehow to balance the equation in favor of life. The meeting ends before dawn, resolve thick in the frozen air. Outside, the world waits, unaware that its fate may rest on a nun's steady hands, and a scientist's heart primed for one last fight. While American GIs were crossing the English Channel and U.S. commanders plotted major offensives, a very different kind of strategy was unfolding behind German lines. Here, in a cold convent kitchen nearly 4,000 miles from Washington, D.C., the rules of traditional combat no longer applied. Instead, survival demanded intelligence, precision, and a chilling willingness to walk the line between heroism and crime. For Sister Marie Clare, the challenge wasn't just defeating the enemy. It was doing so without damning innocent lives in the process, a dilemma familiar to any American commander planning raids or drone strikes decades later. She faced what the U.S. military calls collateral damage, the risk that victory could come at the expense of the very people she vowed to protect. The science was her weapon. Unlike the classic wartime sabotage missions by American OSS operatives, targeting railways, ammunition depots, or enemy convoys, her battlefield was measured in grams, not grenades. She knew that arsenic trioxide, a common ingredient in rat poison and widely studied in U.S. Army chemical warfare labs, could be used to mimic the symptoms of severe food contamination. The question wasn't whether it could kill, but whether it could do so in a way that bought time, sowed chaos, and left the real culprit concealed behind a veil of plausible deniability. Every calculation was a high-stakes gamble. Marie Claire reviewed her chemistry in a battle rhythm reminiscent of Allied codebreakers at Bletchley Park and U.S. scientists working on wartime innovations. How much poison would guarantee a fatal outcome within 48 hours, long enough for the Germans to dismiss the first symptoms as spoiled meat, but certain enough to keep the execution squad from lining up the villagers at dawn? Her clandestine lab work in the convent cellar was as exacting as any U.S. Army experiment in chemical warfare. She dosed her laboratory rats, meticulously documenting the effects. Every symptom, every minute that ticked by, told her how much to use and how best to disguise the attack. But even as she filled her notebook, plagued by the math, her conscience fought for air. A U.S. Marine might justify violence as necessary in battle, but for a nun, the battlefield is the soul. The question burned: was it truly moral to turn her knowledge against another human, even if those lives were officers of the Third Reich, chosen instruments of Nazi terror? If saving the town meant unleashing silent death, was it resistance, or was it just murder? These were questions that haunted even the most hardened American special forces, because sometimes winning meant doing what you could never forgive yourself for later. The technical hurdles piled up. The convent's only arsenic supply was a rusty jar scavenged from an abandoned grain warehouse, more than enough to kill dozens, but not the 100% lethal dose she'd hoped for. If she poured it in all at once, floating flecks could be spotted by the food inspector. The solution: dissolve the powder in boiling water ahead of time, making it vanish into the soup's golden broth. It was the sort of fieldcraft the best U.S. saboteurs learned. Use the tools you have, never risk exposure, plan for every possible inspection. But there was also the ever-watchful enemy. Inspector Klaus Uber, the local SS food tester, had a reputation for thoroughness that U.S. agents infiltrating occupied Europe learned to fear. Yet even he, in his rigid efficiency, held one fatal weakness: he only ever tasted the first bowl. If an interruption could be orchestrated between the inspection and serving, there would be a brief window when chaos could cloak the fatal act. The Allies called these windows of opportunity, moments when fortune, courage, and luck aligned for a single, decisive blow. Morality hung by a thread. Even inside the convent, resistance to the plan was fierce. Mother Superior, the heart and history of the order, begged Marie Clare to halt. If the Germans uncovered the plot, there be American-style collective punishment, a house-to-house purge even U.S. intelligence warned about when training European partisans. Mother Superior's faith clashed with the cold arithmetic of war. Was sacrificing a few Nazi officers worth the destruction of every soul within those stone walls? History is full of such impossible decisions, stretching from bombers over Dresden to the jungles of Vietnam. As the plan crystallized, Sister Marie Clare's supporters grew silent. Some pleaded for prayers, some for patience. An old priest, Father Jacques, a veteran of earlier wars with eyes worn by tragedy, met with Marie Clare in the frozen kitchen. He recited Old Testament stories where violence served a higher good: Judith saving her city through poison, David becoming king after a forbidden act of war. Gently, he gave her absolution, offering the same moral shield American chaplains granted to frightened young GIs before their first battle. But absolution carries its own weight. Approval didn't fill the void, it simply cleared the way for action. And then came Marguerite Fontaine, the convent's devoted cook, her brother on the Nazi execution list. Marie Clare described the plan with scientific clarity, fighting the tremor in her voice. Marguerite listened, nodded once, and asked the only question that mattered: "What do you need me to do?" The die was cast. Science and conscience locked hands. The risk was total, the promise only that innocent blood might be spared at the cost of a guilt no victory could wipe away. In wars from Normandy to the Pacific, the U.S. military taught its soldiers: sometimes the only way forward is through choices you can never undo. And in that Belgian convent, beneath a cross and a battered cauldron, Sister Marie Clare was preparing for a mission every bit as dangerous and every bit as American as any fought with rifles and bayonets. The only difference was the weapon. The countdown to Christmas Day had begun. In the world of frontline battles and air raids, operations were given code names: Overlord, Market Garden, Cobra. But buried deep in the heart of Nazi-occupied Belgium, an American-style operation was coming together in complete secrecy. The Allies might never learn of it, but for Sister Marie Clare and her circle, the stakes were just as high. If the plan failed, the consequences would be swift and deadly. If it succeeded, a town could be saved. Operation Christmas Soup was no accident. It was engineered with the sort of precision U.S. Army tacticians poured into sabotage raids behind enemy lines. The countdown began with Pierre's dawn arrival and a battered brown package, a glass jar containing arsenic trioxide, scavenged from an abandoned warehouse, rat poison repurposed as a weapon of war. In the wrong hands, it was just another tool of death. For Marie Clare, it was hope with a razor's edge. Every mission needs recon, a planning session worthy of Allied intelligence briefings. Sister Marie Clare weighed and recalculated, sifting the white powder with steady hands. She did the math again and again, just as American artillerymen calculated shell trajectories or OSS agents cross-checked German troop movements. The goal: deliver the right dose to each Nazi officer without leaving evidence until it was too late to save them. She tested the powder on the small laboratory rats in the convent cellar, documenting every effect: the sickness, the timing, the fatal result. Every note was a silent prayer for the town's survival. But resources were as scarce here as on any American battlefield. Pierre's entire supply amounted to just 230 grams, enough to kill, but less than perfection demanded. The calculations became urgent: how to divide the poison so that every dinner plate at the Nazi officer's table became a silent secret weapon. American war movies often show the moment before the mission, a squad checking their gear, reviewing the escape routes. In this convent, the weapons were dissolved into hot water, the escape was silence, and the only way out was to never be discovered. Sister Marie Clare mixed the arsenic with boiling water, watching it vanish into a transparent elixir of death. 2 dark brown bottles became the operation's arsenal, hidden in the folds of her habit, more dangerous than any pistol or grenade. Yet the greatest threat lay not in the Nazis' strength, but their suspicion. Inspector Klaus Uber, the German food tester, was as cautious as any American counterspy had ever faced abroad. At 1:30, he tasted the first spoonful, checked the pots, and gave his approval. His process echoed the security protocols American military police enforced around every U.S. command center. But as Marie Clare watched, she marked the critical flaw. Once the inspector left, there would be a fleeting window where the deadly addition could be made, unseen. Here the plan relied on human ingenuity, a trick as old as any battlefield deception. The final piece was Marguerite, steady as any American resistance ally, ready to trigger the distraction. As the clock ticked down, she memorized every detail: the precise time, the scripted apology, the choreography of dropping a heavy tray to draw every German officer's eyes away from the kitchen. It was a maneuver worthy of any covert ops handbook: misdirection, precision, nerves of steel. As December 24th dawned snowy and silent, every movement inside the walled convent became deliberate. The brown bottles disappeared into Marie Clare's pockets. Marguerite rehearsed her drop, a soldier preparing for an undercover task. Outside, the Nazi staff cars rolled in, lined up on the snowy street like armored division vehicles on parade, and the tension grew thick enough to taste. Inside, laughter echoed off the ancient stone, Nazi songs blared as the officers toasted Christmas, unaware that the day's feast hid a secret better than any booking in Allied intelligence. At exactly 2:47 p.m., the planned H-hour, Marguerite's tray crashed to the floor, shattering the moment. All heads turned, confusion rippling like gunfire through enemy ranks. With steady hands and nerves honed by months of fear, Sister Marie Clare moved. She poured both bottles into the bubbling soup cauldron in a motion as smooth as any Allied spy planting explosives on a railway line. The transparent poison disappeared, stirred 3 times for certainty. In less than half a minute, the operation was complete, the weapon deployed, the risk incalculable. The officers returned to their seats, still smirking at the supposed clumsiness of the convent cook. They raised their glasses in a final, victorious toast, oblivious to how close their fates now lay to the edge. The first ladlefuls of golden soup were served with the sort of routine calm that high-risk covert missions demanded. No shaking hands, no sign of guilt. Even as the world outside the walls shivered beneath the weight of occupation, the ultimate high-stakes gamble was already in play. All across war-torn Europe, Allied commandos and American special forces knew missions like these rarely went according to plan. But sometimes, just sometimes, the smallest operation could change everything. For Dinant, for the orphans, for the refugees cowering in the chapel, this bowl of Christmas soup was their last hope, a silent act of resistance as risky and as courageous as storming the beaches at Normandy. The rest was left to fate, science, and the invisible hand of war that even the world's greatest strategists could never completely control. In the high-stakes world of wartime espionage, every victory comes with consequences. American military strategists called it blowback, the unpredictable, sometimes catastrophic fallout of secret operations. For Sister Marie Clare and her allies at the convent, this blowback was about to arrive with the force of a hurricane, and no one could predict who would be swept away. Christmas morning dawned, not with church bells and carols, but with sirens and the anguished cries of men in uniform. The Nazi officers who'd feasted at the convent's table woke violently ill, their agony echoing through the occupied streets like an air raid siren. Reports later collected by American and British intelligence described the headquarters in chaos, a scene that might have resembled a medical emergency on an Allied base suddenly struck by poison gas. German doctors rushed from bed to bed, their medical kits useless against what they thought was a case of deadly food contamination. By noon on December 26th, American war analysts would have called it a mass casualty event. 38 Nazi officers were already dead, their bodies moved to a makeshift morgue in the cold stone basement. 7 others lingered, their fates sealed. None would survive. To the local townspeople, huddled in cellars, listening for the sound of boots on snow, it was both a miracle and the beginning of a nightmare. The Nazi response came faster than an Allied counterattack. 20 Gestapo agents arrived in black cars, their arrival as chilling as an early morning MP raid on a compromised base. Entire neighborhoods were cordoned off with brutal efficiency. Doors were kicked in, belongings searched, citizens rounded up and interrogated. American war correspondents used to seeing the might of the Allied occupation would have been shocked by the ruthless precision of the Nazi crackdown. Within days, 147 Belgians were pulled in for questioning. For the Gestapo, questioning meant hours under blinding lamps, threats, beatings, and in the worst cases, torture. 12 were taken to headquarters for special interrogation, the code phrase in German that American POWs in Europe feared most. With no evidence and no confession, 3 innocent kitchen workers died under torture. Even hardened U.S. intelligence officers would have found the cost shattering. Anna Dubois, Thomas Laurent, and Sophie Martin, all lost for a crime they knew nothing about. Inside the convent, the walls felt like they were closing in. The ancient courtyards where children once chased snowflakes were patrolled night and day by armed guards. The kitchen, a place of warmth and hope, was doused with harsh chemical disinfectants, top to bottom, as investigators searched for every stray granule of poison. Food now arrived in locked containers from Nazi kitchens, resembling the tight food security at American command posts in the Pacific Theater. Sister Marie Clare was questioned 4 separate times. Each interrogation took on the same grim structure as an American court-martial, a different Gestapo officer, a set script of questions, a relentless search for any sign of guilt or hesitation. Her answers were careful, rehearsed like a GI memorizing his cover story. Yes, I made the soup. Yes, I tasted it. No, I saw nothing unusual. Her voice never cracked. Years later, American psychologists studying resistance under torture would call this building the lie, repeating the story until even the interrogator starts to believe it. The 4th officer, Sturmbannführer Ernst Cook, brought photographs of the dead. He tried to break her spirit, asking if she felt sympathy, if she would pray for these enemies. With the same resolve shown by American prisoners who defied their captors with silence, Sister Marie Clare looked at each photo and simply nodded. I pray for all the dead, a line as protective as any American dog tag. But the hunt for the truth didn't end there. By January 4th, a team of Nazi toxicologists arrived from Berlin, equipped with the latest microscopes and chemical test kits, laboratory gear like that found in the best U.S. military hospitals. Their tests were swift and ruthless. Soon enough, the chemical fingerprint was discovered in the soup remains, arsenic trioxide in precisely calculated amounts. The result was a second wave of mass arrests. 89 citizens, including distant villagers, were thrown into the medieval hell of Binden Fortress, a fortress Americans would one day cite in their studies of Nazi war crimes. Inside its stone walls, thick as a Sherman tank's steel, prisoners faced daily beatings, starvation, and relentless cold. Few would ever return. The air in Dinant changed. American war journalists wrote about the silent towns, places where no one dared speak above a whisper, where windows stayed shuttered and children vanished from the streets. Parents warned their children to never mention the soup, to trust no one, to avoid even a glance at a uniform. The cost of resistance was now public, a reminder as brutal as anything seen in the hardest-fought American campaigns in Italy or France. Through all of it, Sister Marie Clare moved as she always had, quiet, composed, bearing her burden behind unflinching eyes. She saw every empty bed, heard every missing laugh, and knew exactly what her actions had cost. But she also watched as the dreaded executions were canceled. One brutal act had saved 127 townspeople from certain death, and through delays and confusion, spared even more civilians across occupied Belgium, in ways that American intelligence would only understand many years after the war. But heroism, as every decorated American veteran knows, often carries a price that follows you forever. A price paid not by medals, but by the souls you cannot save and the nightmares that never quite fade. In the annals of American military history, tales of secret missions behind enemy lines have always captured the national imagination. But in the occupied heartland of Europe, sometimes the boldest escapes and most effective strikes came not from U.S. commandos, but from civilians risking everything for the hope of a future beyond occupation. When the last Nazi officer succumbed in the wake of Operation Christmas Soup, the shockwaves tore through not only Dinant but also through the ranks of German command, triggering a crisis the Allies would later leverage for their own strategic gains. It started with confusion. Reports filed by local Nazi command reached Berlin, and soon after, desk officers at British and American intelligence headquarters. Within days, new protocols began spreading through the German ranks. Every mess hall and military kitchen instituted intensified food security, modeled on the same layered system American bases used to shield commanders from poison threats. Where before there was complacency, now there was fear and delay. Officers refused to eat before inspection, and nothing was trusted unless tested multiple times. These slowdowns bought precious time for other resistance cells and provided even U.S. paratroopers and OSS operatives scattered in the region with crucial windows to operate. What no report could measure, though, was the fear that now gripped the German occupiers. Their predictable routines, so vital for Allied intelligence, so carefully documented by the network of spies and saboteurs, were suddenly fractured. The Germans tightened their grip everywhere, but the cost was operational paralysis. In at least 7 other towns, planned reprisals were delayed or scrapped outright, with U.S. intelligence intercepting memos about critical manpower shortages. Where a tyrant's calendar once held the promise of blood, now it was filled with uncertainty. All this, American war historians would argue, came from a single convent kitchen. For Sister Marie Clare, however, every tactical ripple carried a shadow of dread. The Gestapo did not close their files. Her name, once whispered as a protector, now landed on a list labeled Final Interrogation, High Priority. It wasn't long before the underground alarm was raised. Word reached the local resistance. a network that mirrored the clandestine operations of America's own Office of Strategic Services. The warning was clear. If she stayed, there would be no more secret prayers or calculations. There would be only cellars, torture, and death. Escape from occupied Europe was an ordeal known to every Allied agent caught behind enemy lines, and for Sister Marie Clare, it meant surrendering the life she'd built, trusting her fate to the webwork of partisans and spies. On a moonless March night, her rescuers came, led through the convent's winding underground tunnels, cloaked in silence and darkness. Her disguise was simple but ironclad. Forged papers identifying her as Claire Mercier, seamstress from Brussels, prepared by the same hands that had smuggled down American pilots to safety weeks before. The journey through enemy territory is the stuff of war legend, a route mapped in Allied intelligence files and recounted by survivors of the escape lines that crisscrossed Belgium, France, and Spain. By day, Marie Clare hid in frigid barns and damp village cellars. By night, she trudged miles along icy roads, moving under threat of detection by roving Nazi patrols. Each false checkpoint, each whispered password, was the legacy of resistance work as dangerous and glamorous as anything in an American spy novel. Crossing the Pyrenees on foot meant navigating blizzards and police traps. Even in Spain technically neutral, but laced with hidden threats, arrest was a near-constant risk. But it was the skill of the forgers and the discipline of the partisans, trained in tactics U.S. Army manuals would recognize, that ensured her freedom. 6 weeks of danger and desperation finally ended at the Portuguese border, where American and British diplomatic contacts waited to spirit escapees onward. The sight of a British steamship, the icy Atlantic wind, and the skyline of Lisbon were a second birth for Marie Clare. By the time she stepped onto the docks in London, her story was already a secret of deepest value to Allied intelligence. 3 days of debriefing followed, American intelligence officers and British analysts grilling her for every detail of Nazi procedure, resistance tactics, and German food security. The Americans were especially keen. Could she identify chemical agents? Did she know how Nazi supply lines operated under stress and fear? Her answers, cool and methodical, shaped new anti-poison protocols at U.S. war bases in France and even inspired OSS training briefings for future European agents. But even with her value to the Allies, Marie Clare's ordeal didn't end at escape. Assigned to a modest office in Westminster, she became a vital node in the Allied intelligence web, interviewing refugees, decoding testimony, matching faces and aliases to wanted collaborators. Still, her heart stayed anchored to Dinant. The children, the old refugees, the families spared by a decision that had changed the course of the town, the region, maybe even the war itself. And in the end, it would be a whisper in a late-war Allied report that captured her legacy best. Civilian resistance, armed with nothing but intelligence and courage, has altered the occupation's equilibrium. Ripples from small deeds like storm waves break on every shore. For every dramatic operation planned in a U.S. war base or an Allied command center, there are untold stories that never make the headlines. Acts of courage and defiance kept classified, hidden in archives, or whispered among veterans but unknown to the world. Sister Marie Clare's story became one of those buried legends, her name absent from history books but her choices echoing across generations. After months in London aiding the Allied intelligence machine, screening escapees, translating resistance messages, and identifying the Nazi collaborators whose names often landed on OSS and U.S. Army wanted lists, Sister Marie Clare's heart never really left Belgium. The war's tide finally turned, and as news of the Allied liberation spread, her mind was consumed with hope and terror for the people of Dinant. She scoured every update from American military radio, finding in each victory the echo of what had been risked, and won, on a single desperate Christmas Eve years before. Autumn 1944 marked the end of occupation in Dinant, American armored divisions and British tank columns rolled through the ruined streets. For those spared from execution, every American soldier was seen as a miracle. But for Sister Marie Clare, returning was as bittersweet as any homecoming from the front. The convent remained, battered but unbroken. The town square, once marked for massacre, had been transformed into a makeshift memorial, fresh flowers neatly laid where bullet-riddled walls had stood. She re-entered this altered world like a ghost. Some called her the Angel of Mercy, others the Christmas Avenger. But just like so many American agents and resistance figures, she never spoke a word about her true role. Her face appeared in town, and survivors greeted her with gratitude and questions she would never answer. Many of the orphans were still alive, thinner but unbroken, while the old refugees sobbed with relief. She worked beside Mother Superior in silence, rebuilding lives with the same calm efficiency she once poured into a deadly calculation. Even as her legend grew and the story of the poisoned Christmas soup passed from kitchen to pub to city squares across liberated Belgium, the real details stayed sealed, so tightly guarded that even the U.S. military would have called her file top secret. When a Belgian colonel came with a small wooden box, presenting her with the Croix de Guerre, the nation's highest medal for wartime bravery, it was a ceremony attended only by those whose names had been listed for execution and now lived in freedom. But heroism never rests easily. For Sister Marie Clare, too many people had seen her face, too many rumors swirled. By 1949, she returned to Montreal, quietly removed her nun's habit for the last time, and asked the church for release from her vows, not in shame but in deep exhaustion. The Vatican's petition, archived in Rome, simply says, "Released for years of heroism performed in silence for the salvation of innocents in war." Her transition from wartime resistance operative to anonymous civilian mirrored the experience of countless American veterans and intelligence officers. She took a post at McGill University, teaching chemistry with the understated efficiency of a person who knew formulas could save or destroy. Most observers assumed she spent the war in the safety of Canada, never realizing their gentle professor had once engineered an operation worthy of any Allied espionage legend. Her fame in Dinant faded into folklore. The nuns kept the story alive, but never revealed the truth to curious journalists and American tourists who arrived wanting to sample the famous Christmas soup. The wartime files, even after Belgium declassified them in 1983, remained unread by many. Her obituaries made no mention of mission names or resistance action, describing only her distinguished teaching and devotion to her students. Yet in classrooms on both sides of the Atlantic, history professors and military ethicists still debated the morality and impact of what she had done. Did her single act of defiance change the way Nazi occupation forces operated? Did it save more lives than some Allied bombing campaigns? Could the calculus of one life for many ever be justified, whether at an army headquarters or hidden in a convent cellar? American war base analysts who later studied her file saw in her a symbol of the kind of unseen hero that wins wars, an ordinary citizen, armed with knowledge and courage, willing to bear the closest held secret for the rest of her days. This, too, was World War II, the war fought not only by soldiers but by teachers, scientists, cooks, and nuns. Their greatest victories didn't always earn medals or headlines. Sometimes their battles ended with a peaceful night's sleep, knowing a town still lived. Long after Sister Marie Clare's heart failed her quietly in her sleep, her secret lived on in the classified files, the grateful memories of a town that survived, and the questions that history continues to ask. The war may have ended, the bases packed up, and the tanks rolled home, but in those unseen hours behind enemy lines, legacies were written in silence, caution, and unbearable courage. And like so many of America's own unsung heroes, her real memorial was not a monument of stone, but the generations of children who survived. Because when the moment came, she chose action, whatever the cost.